What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Neighborhood Podcast. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast. My name is Kevin Valentin. And in today's segment, we are going to talk about our Game 2 preview of the NBA Finals. So, obviously, Game 1 just wrapped up and is in the books. Denver takes a 1-0 series lead against the Miami Heat, and they win Game 1 by the score of 104-93. And obviously, both teams have to make adjustments. Just because Denver's up 1-0 doesn't necessarily mean they don't have anything to change. And Miami has everything to change, especially not wanting to go down 0-2 headed to Miami for Game 3. So, Kyle, I'm going to kick this one to you. What do you believe both teams need to do? What adjustments they need to make in order to capitalize and claim a victory in Game 2?
So I'll start with Denver simply just because they won game one. They had the momentum on their side after that win on Thursday night. Looking back at Denver, I think one of the things that they're going to focus on going into game two is improving their three-point efficiency. They shot under 30% behind the three-point line. And seeing what Denver's been capable behind the three-point line throughout their entire playoff run this year, that was a pretty underwhelming performance. And I think going into game two, I'm going to expect just better performances from guys like Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., especially behind the three-point line. Michael Porter Jr. had some open looks, wasn't able to knock them down. Jamal Murray was only 2 of 7 behind the three-point line. These guys, especially when they get going behind the three-point line, these guys can light it up. And they've been huge factors when it comes to why Denver's in the position that they're in right now. So I definitely expect Denver to shoot probably somewhere around, I'm going to say about 35 to maybe 40% going into game two, which would be a huge boost compared to what they had in game one. You could even say the same for Miami, because even though that Miami outshot Denver behind the three-point line, 33% is probably not their best mark that they want to hit. They probably want to get into those upper 30s, maybe even into those lower 40s. And that could definitely make it a more competitive and compelling game just behind the three-point line for both teams. To go back to Denver for a second, when it comes to that fourth quarter in game one, you could tell that they allowed Miami to get back into the game. And I imagine the coaching staff is going to really hound on them for that, just because when you're up 20 plus points, you can't allow Miami to get back into the game and get it under a 10-point deficit for them when Denver essentially dominated the first 3 quarters of the game. So I think from a coaching perspective, they're going to focus on, you got to play the full 48 minutes. You got to keep your pedal to the metal and not allow Miami to get back into any sort of competitive stance in a potential situation like that could arise in game two. And overall, just keep running the offense through Jokic. It seems like whenever defenses bring too much help against Jokic, just because Jokic is just an absolute wizard running Denver's offense, it leaves open three-point specialists like Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, and KCP open for some shots. And what we've seen throughout their playoff run is they knock down these shots consistently. I think going into game two, we will see an improvement in that regard. I think if they do that, I think Denver will put themselves in a position to go up 2-0. When it comes to Miami, Miami definitely needs to make more of the adjustments here, simply just because they got smoked in the first 2 quarters as far as I see it. I mean, it got to a point where they were almost dealing with a 20-point deficit going into halftime. And, when you're going on the road in game one, you're up over 5,000 feet. It's not a situation that you want to be in. You want to be the team out in front, or at least be in a competitive stance in that first finals game. They did not do that. And it was essentially just because their transition defense was really poor in the first quarter. They allowed Aaron Gordon to get off to a really hot start. It wasn't Nikola Jokic. I mean, it was Aaron Gordon who really set the tone for Denver's offense. And that was despite the fact that Bam was actually putting up good numbers on the other side on their offense. It's just defensively, they couldn't hang with Denver in that first half. And essentially, it was all catch up for them throughout the rest of the game. So definitely going to have to focus on some transition defensive elements going into game two, improve at that aspect. And then when it comes to the offense, they have to improve behind the three-point line with Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin, and Max Strus. These guys have been huge pieces for Miami throughout their entire playoff run this year. And they were essentially no-shows in game one. I'm not expecting all 3 of these guys to have a similar performance in game one. These guys know that they left some shots out there on the court. They're going to step it up in game two. I wouldn't be surprised that between the 3 of them, that they combine somewhere around maybe 30 to 35 points going into game two, That's a huge improvement potentially going into game 2 compared to what they had in game 1. Just because, Kev, these guys just couldn't knock down open shots. Granted, there were some contested ones, but there were plenty of opportunities for these guys to score, and they just couldn't step up and knock down those shots. And who knows? We could even see Tyler Hero make an appearance. He hasn't played since the first game of that Bucks series that took place in the first round of the playoffs. And if they integrate him into the lineup, that's another three-point shooter that you can use at your disposal. And seeing the way that Denver's been playing offensively, you're going to need all shooters on deck when it comes to what you could do offensively. So overall, when I look at this game too, I'm going to pick Denver in this one just because Denver's been unstoppable at home throughout this entire playoff run. I think at the end of the day, Miami's going to make this more competitive. I think Jimmy Butler, I think guys like Kyle Lowry and Bam, they're going to continue some of the successes that they had in game 1. I think Jimmy needs to be a little bit more aggressive going into game 2. I think he was a little too passive. But a part of that is just Denver's really playing good defense. They're not allowing him to get mid-range shots, and they're forcing kickouts, which I think if you're looking at it from Jimmy Butler's perspective, he's going to have to step it up and be more aggressive if he can get some open shots. But overall, Miami's going to have to really go pedal to the metal here, knock down some three-point shots, improve their transition defense, and try not to get killed in the paint. I think if they're able to do those things, it will be a more competitive game. But I think overall, Denver's just too strong. Jokic is still dropping triple-doubles. I think Jamal Murray's going to be more consistent behind the three-point line. And I think we're going to see very similar performances from Denver's role players like Michael Porter Jr., KCP, and Aaron Gordon. They're running a very small rotation in Denver. It's worked out for them tremendously so far. Unless Miami can counteract that, I think Denver goes up 2-0 in the series when this series transitions back to Miami for game 3.
Well, in terms of what I believe, I mean, you just went over Denver's perspective, so I'll simply go over what Miami needs to do to improve. Miami's got a lot to work with, right? We all know the run that they've been on. We understand that they beat the Bucks. We understand that they beat the Knicks, the Celtics. They have the potential. They have the roster. They have the coach. They have the superstar, and they have the grit, that kind of fight, that mentality of saying, we don't care who we play. But that didn't come to show, or that didn't come to the surface in game 1. They had a very inefficient night from the field. They did not attack the basket. They were lackadaisical in transition defense. And I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when you're going up against someone like Nikola Jokic, you know that he's going to get his points. He's going to be effective in distributing the basketball and rebounding and altering shots because he is a 7-footer, if not 6'11" and a half, whatever the official measurement is. You have to find a way to limit the role players. Aaron Gordon going for 14 in the first quarter, unacceptable. Michael Porter Jr. hitting some timely shots in transition, not going to cut it. And then, of course, you got to pay attention to Jamal Murray, who was always going to be a threat to go off for 25 to 30 points. I think the biggest issue Miami had was being undersized to start the game. You don't start with 3 guards when you're going up against an average of 6'9" to 6'10" from the forward position on. I understand you wanted to be quick, you wanted to run and try to play a very quick half-court offense type of thing where you run a bunch of screens and get your shooters open. Those shooters did not knock down the shots that you needed them to. Max Strus was 0 of 9 from the three-point line. Duncan Robinson was 1 of 5. Caleb Martin was 1 of 7 from the field. It just did not look good for the Heat in almost every single factor. And that doesn't include Jimmy Butler struggling from the field as well. He was 6 of 14, but there were some floaters he missed, some jump shots that he had missed, and I believe that has to change for the Heat. Excuse me.
Bless you.
In order to win. Thank you. I think that the Heat are going to have to make some adjustments in the lineup. I think that Highsmith made some strides and made enough of a statement to earn himself some more minutes. Now, whether or not he starts is up to Erik Spoelstra and what he believes he can handle, but him picking up Jamal Murray in the second half from half court, hitting timely shots in that fourth quarter run that was led by Kyle Lowry, made an impact to which Denver did not have an answer for. So maybe you put him into the starting lineup. Maybe you give him more minutes earlier on. Maybe Tyler Hero comes into the game in games 2 or 3, whichever one he's available for, because you need to get a spark going sooner rather than later. The run that Miami went on was way too late. And I think that if that run had started earlier, or if some shots had fallen at the beginning of the game, if Max Strus maybe hits 2 or 3, if maybe Caleb Martin goes and hits a couple of those mid-range jump shots that he took early on, Miami may get into a quicker rhythm. But if they fall short, and if those shots aren't falling and they don't attack the basket, it's not going to be a good series for the Heat. You do not want to go down 0-2 headed back to Miami and just be in this slump. You don't want to be not running back on defense because you're just sitting there and you're gassed from the altitude of Denver or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're finally tired from having all these longer series later on in the playoffs. But I mean, Miami has to find a way to step up. This is where champions are made, right? This is where legends are forged. You have to find a way to dig deep, make these adjustments, and find a way to win. Jimmy Butler is the type of player that will not let games like this get away from him or series like this get away from him. So I expect Miami to bounce back. I don't necessarily know who's going to win game 2. I don't have a prediction just because I feel that both teams can find ways to make significant adjustments to win the game. But if I had to edge it closely, I would probably say that Miami bounces back and they find a way to claim game 2.